Well, good morning, church. It is really good to see so many of y'all here and to know that a lot of y'all are tuning in on the road or catching this later as you come back from a holiday week. It's good to be here with y'all. I'm Pastor Jenny. If we haven't met yet, I'm one of the ministers here at MDUMC. It's just a joy to be over here at the journey with y'all, bringing the word and wrapping up this worship series as it was mentioned in that video. So we are wrapping up a series called Unfinished Business, and it's a little ironic, I think, because we have this sense that we are done with it, but it's unfinished business. At any rate, we are also wrapping up this Christian year. Today is Christ the King Sunday on the liturgical calendar, where we recognize that Jesus is Lord of all, reigns over earth and in the kingdom to come. And next Sunday is the first Sunday in Advent, which is always a big Happy New Year to the Christian church. So we begin a new Christian year next year. We're wrapping up so many things today, and it's good to be here with y'all. I don't know about many of you, but you may have been gathering with family over the past week too. And one of the projects that I talked about with my family as we gathered for Thanksgiving is my dad's wrapping up this project called Storyworth that I want to tell you about in a minute. But this idea of wrapping things up and moving on to what's next is where we're headed today. And we're going to explore a well-known parable to do that. This is from the Gospel of Luke. It's in the 15th chapter, and it is the parable of the prodigal. Some call it the prodigal and his brother. Some call it the prodigal son. Some just leave it at the prodigal. Titles can be funny, but at any rate, I invite you to hear these words from this gospel, one of the best-known parables that Jesus tells. And you can turn to your Bible if you brought it, or you can follow along with the words on the screen. Or if you're familiar with this story and you think it might help you to hear something so familiar afresh, you can also just close your eyes as I read this and try to picture yourself in this story. Notice a detail you hadn't before. I'm really glad that you're here. I'm really glad to share this story with you. Let's dive in. Then Jesus said, "There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger of them said to his father, 'Father, give me the share of the property that will belong to me.' So he divided his property between them. A few days later, the younger son gathered all he had and traveled to a distant country, and there he squandered his property in dissolute living. When he had spent everything, a severe famine took place throughout the country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed the pigs. He would gladly have filled himself with the pods that the pigs were eating, and no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, 'How many of my father's hired hands have bread enough and to spare? But here I am dying of hunger. I will get up and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me like one of your hired hands.' So he set off and went to his father. But while he was still far off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion. He ran and put his arms around him and kissed him. Then the son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his slaves, 'Quickly, bring out a robe, the best one, and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet, and get the fatted calf and kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' And they began to celebrate. Now his elder son was in the field, and when he came in and approached the house, he heard music and dancing. He called one of the slaves and asked what was going on. He replied, 'Your brother has come, and your father has killed the fatted calf, because he has got him back safe and sound.' And then he, the elder brother, he became angry and refused to go in. His father came out and began to plead with him, but he answered his father, 'Listen, for all those years I have been working like a slave for you, and I have never disobeyed your command. Yet you have never given me even a young goat so that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came back, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fatted calf for him.' Then the father said to him, 'Son, you were always with me, and all that is mine is yours. But we had to celebrate and rejoice because this brother of yours was dead and has come to life. He was lost and has been found.'" This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. We do give thanks to God for this parable. And it could have been a sense of finished business if that parable had stopped partway in between, but it goes on and it's complicated, but it is a beloved parable. I mentioned that over Thanksgiving I was talking with my family, and my dad is kind of wrapping up this project, this gift that I gave him for one of his birthday Father's Days a year ago, called Storyworth. Because it is the time of year that we are in, if you, like me, might have been watching Hallmark movies, there's an ad running for Storyworth right now that's so compelling it makes me want to do it all over again. But basically, this is a service you gift it to someone and they are emailed one question per week, a writing prompt to help them share a part of their backstory, to give a little vignette, a little glimpse into part of their life. And so finally, my dad got the ball rolling, and he's written just dozens and dozens of these stories, and we're talking about getting the book printed and ready to go for Christmas, and he's excited, and we're excited. And yet I think he's having a hard time saying he's done with it and like hitting print, like send. It's part of the service. You buy this whole package, they send the emails, and you get a book, and it's all done for you. But I got an email from him just this morning saying, like, just when I thought I was done, he couldn't resist the latest writing prompt that they sent, which was, did you ever get in trouble at school? So I'm looking forward to reading that when I finish here today. It's funny to be writing a story about your life when your life is still going on. Likewise, this family in the parable, they're still in the middle of it, aren't they? It's unfinished business. They can't hit print. It's unresolved, and there we are with it. Most of the parables are like that, as it turns out. They're sort of unfinished. They're raw. They're not resolved always in a neat and tidy little bow. If we try to overmanage them, we're probably missing something important. So our parables are sort of like our family lore as followers of Christ. So you might have immersed yourself in your family lore over the past week with gatherings and with phone calls and those catching up opportunities. Today we're going to immerse ourselves in some family lore based around this parable of the prodigal. So in this series, Unfinished Business, we've been looking at parables, how they are unfinished, how they're kind of left open, how there's just some complexity to each of them. And as I started to prepare for this sermon, I was utterly convinced that we had gotten the order wrong. And, if you've been following the series the last 3 weeks, we talked about unfinished business in families, in the community last week, and today in the world. And I was like, surely this parable is meant for the family one, right? I mean, you've got a father and you've got 2 sons. That's family. And so I struggled. I was like, what does this parable have to tell us about the world in which we live? And so as I sat with that this week, I was reminded of 2 global church conferences that have taken place in time and in space. The first one that came to mind, I attended myself. Back in 2016, Houston was the host city for the World Methodist Conference, and it was such a fun event. It was awesome. So this is a gathering of all of the Methodist churches, not just the United Methodist Church, but the British Methodist Church and the Methodist Church in Australia and in Asia, all over the place. It was a huge, massive gathering of people from all over the place. And because they don't share a common polity, like rules, right, and constitutions and things like that, but they share a common lineage, John Wesley, the Methodist, Wesleyan heritage. Our theology is similar. Our outlook, our importance on grace is similar. You get all the best stuff about a conference with none of the messy business, voting, all of that, which is a lot of fun. So at this World Methodist Conference a few years ago, I listened to a sermon on this parable preached by the Reverend Grace E. Matthew, and it was fire. So good. You can find it online. Listen to the whole thing. She's great. And she said in this, talking about the parable, she opens it up by saying, a man has 2 sons. There's nothing extraordinary about that. Nothing unusual. Nothing particularly interesting, she says. It's a very simple parable about a man who had 2 sons. An ordinary family. to tell you the truth. Nothing earth-shattering happens. Son behaves like sons often behave, and the father behaves the way the book on good parenting says a father should behave. And yet scholars tell us that this very ordinary story is the best known and best loved of all Jesus' parables. And I know we haven't taken a vote, but I think that probably in any church congregation there is a lot of love for this parable of the prodigal son. One scholar calls this parable Jesus' masterpiece. The parable moves even seasoned Greek scholars and stuffed out exegetes of the Bible when writing about it. They sway from their so-called scientific, free, objective perspective, and they become, she says, remarkably tender. One exegete says that this parable is the most exquisite and penetrating of all stories of divine mercy and love. So this parable is about a family, but it is about a family in the world, and it is about the family of the world, the human family. So we're going to dive in. In this parable, there are two brothers. They're very similar to one another, but they would never, ever believe you if you told them that. But both of them end up estranged from their father. One leaves, one never comes in. Both of them get caught up in this zero-sum game, this view that there's only so much of whatever it is they're after in the world available for them. And that if one of the brothers gets some, that's less for the other one to have. If one of them gets the fatted calf, that's a loss for the other. It's a zero-sum game. And there's never quite enough to fulfill their needs, to demonstrate love. In the story, some scholars wonder, who is the prodigal? Is it the first brother, the second, the father? What does that mean, even, prodigal? These two brothers, they even talk alike. There is a Greek word in this story that's not used anywhere else in the New Testament that is placed on both of their lips at different points in the story. In verse 12, early on in this parable, the younger son says to his father, "Father, give me the share of the property, the ousia, that will belong to me." And so the father divides up his ousia, this property, the Greek word there, and hands it over to him. Now later on, when the older brother is out in the field and the father goes out to try to get him to come in, his response to his father in verse 30, "When this son of yours came back, who has devoured your ousia, your property, with prostitutes and dissolute living, you killed the fatted calf for him." This ousia is at the heart of this story. It means in this story, on one flat understanding of it, property, the stuff, the money, the inheritance, that which can be quantified and divided and commodified. As pastors, it happens more than you would want to believe that when someone passes away and their family is left behind trying to figure out how to settle things, how to wrap things up, how to divide things up, so often conflict breaks out. And it goes deeper than just who gets what. It gets moved into that realm of who stood where. It goes from the property and the stuff that can be quantified to the stuff that cannot be quantified, the stuff that's qualified. There's a lot of counting that goes on in my house. This morning I woke up to the sound of my two younger sons counting the change in their piggy banks. It was very noisy. The 4-year-old reports that he has 105,000 of what I don't know. At every mealtime, there is a very careful audit performed by my kids, the two younger ones. The 14-year-old's over it. He's fine. The two younger ones, they're 2 years apart. Very careful audit of making sure that the level of milk in each glass is perfectly, exactly the same. And it's not just the humans that I live with who do all of this accounting. We accidentally ended up with 2 puppy dogs. They're both very young still and very stupid, but cute. And they too are very invested in a proper division of finite resources, of kibble, of bully sticks, of biscuits, and even of the couch snuggles. If I'm giving attention to one, that's attention the other one's not getting, and they have an issue with that. I didn't realize that I lived with so many accountants. it's kind of a problem because they all are wrapped up, and we do it too, in this belief that life is a zero-sum game. They are vying for the property, the stuff, the ousia that they see in front of them. And just like they vie for that ousia in the Bible, this happens frequently too. It's a condition that's known and revisited throughout one story after another in the Bible. Two sons is a common trope in the Bible. It's a perfectly ordinary start. When Jesus begins telling this parable to the original hearers of the parable, they would be instantly reminded of so many stories from the Hebrew scriptures involving two brothers. Now, a lot of groups here at MDUMC have gotten to know Amy Jill Levine through her really excellent book, Short Stories by Jesus. It's all about parables. I highly recommend it. And she talks about how biblically literate people know the beginning words of this parable. There was a man who had two sons. It introduces a literary convention. It's a pattern. It's a trope. We kind of get a clue about where things are going to go from this. As these readers also know, we do well to identify with the younger son. Throughout each of these stories, it's the younger son, surprisingly, over and over and over again, who has the upper hand. It kind of breaks convention with the culture of that time. So from Cain and Abel in Genesis, to Esau and Jacob, to Manasseh and Ephraim, David, who was the youngest of seven, his son Solomon, who was the younger one. In each of these stories, it's the younger member of the generation, the brotherhood, that we're supposed to identify with. So take, for example, go a little deeper, Abraham's two sons, Ishmael, the older, Isaac, the younger. Ishmael and his mother Hagar are expelled from camp. And the prediction for this firstborn Ishmael is that he shall be a wild ass of a man. Although Isaac enters the family portrait much, much, much later than his brother, he's the one that will inherit not just Abraham's wealth and ousia, but his covenant with God. So the stakes are even higher. And although Isaac has to endure what must have been a very traumatic experience of almost being sacrificed by his own father, he is the favored one. Now, it's not always so extreme, these examples, but every family experiences conflict. Maybe it's your family of origin that you can identify this with. Maybe it's the family you are building where you feel like you're constantly refereeing the conflict, and you've got accountants in your house too. It could be the church family that experiences this conflict, the human family. This conference that I attended, the World Methodist Conference, it was the first time that I had heard such a deep dive into this parable. And it was also the first time that I had such a tangible, visible sense of how global the church is as well. It wasn't even a truly ecumenical conference. It was all from within the Wesleyan heritage, but I still was struck by just how diverse the church is and how across differences of practice and culture and language and opinion, we are called to unity. That was the theme of the conference. This World Methodist Conference in 2016, it took its theme from the prayer of Jesus. They call it the high priestly prayer in John 17. The theme was all about being one. Jesus in John 17, he prays this over his disciples and those that they would disciple and that they would disciple in us. And he prays, "My prayer is not for them alone. I pray also for those who will believe in me through their message, that all of them may be one. Father, just as you are in me and I am in you, may they also be in us so that the world may believe that you have sent me." Jesus prays this and demonstrates, is pointing our attention to the fact that in our unity, in our remembering that we are family, that there is enough, that we are of one substance, one essence, one family. That is what the mission of God is about, this oneness. There's another global church conference that took place like way back, that I think that John 17 also informed the theme of. This idea of praying that the church, the followers of Jesus, would be one. And it is the Council of Nicaea. I don't know how up you are on your church history, but the Council of Nicaea explored the relationship of God the Father and God the Son. It was called together by Emperor Constantine in 325, and it was called together to resolve conflict, certain matters that were dividing the church. It was the first ever ecumenical council, meaning that people from different churches and different regions came together and needed to solve this main issue at hand, which was how a Christian should properly understand the divinity of Christ. There was a church leader who was a great speaker, and it was so compelling that a lot of people believed what he said, who claimed that the Father and the Son, and by association the Holy Spirit, were not one God, but were God and then lesser forms. That it was God the Father, the Creator, and that the Creator created both the Son and the Spirit, in addition to a lot of stuff. And so Jesus was not the same as God. Now, we don't believe that anymore. We decided that was untrue, and it happened here at this council, the Council of Nicaea. It's where we get the Nicene Creed from, that churches everywhere, every Christian church will proclaim the Nicene Creed. It's something that we can all gather around. And so Arius, who was saying that Jesus was not the same substance, the same stuff, the same ousia as God the Father, but was kind of like God the Father. Arius was saying that. He was determined to be wrong. My favorite side note story of this whole conference is that St. Nicholas of Myra got so fed up with Arius and this unwillingness to budge on this issue that he actually, St. Nicholas of Myra, who became St. Nick, right? Santa Claus, right? We're 29 days from Christmas. He actually just slapped Arius and kind of sent him out because he would not back down from this. You know, looking at scriptures like John 17, when Jesus prays that the people would be one, just as Jesus says, I am in you and you are in me, we're one, we're of the same. That is what we determined to be doctrinal truth, that God and Jesus are one God in different parts, right? They are of the same substance. And the word for that is homoousia, right? Homo, same, ousia, stuff, same stuff. That God the Father and God the Son are the same stuff, right? So at the Council of Nicaea, they sorted this all out. They had to figure out this relationship. And then they drafted this creed, articulating that Jesus was God from God, light from light, very God of very God, begotten, not made, being of one substance with the Father, homoousia, one and the same as the Father. Now, what does this have to do with the parable of the prodigal son, right? In what way is that father and that son of the same? You know, the two brothers were constantly vying for the stuff, the ousia, and they've forgotten that the stuff that matters is the substance that made them who they are, not the things that they could acquire and accumulate to demonstrate their Father's love. But it was the love that was the more important thing. Amy Jill Levine kind of elaborates on this idea of two brothers, and she talks about how if we want to look, for example, at just one of these other Bible examples of sons. A father had two sons, Ishmael and Isaac. She says, if either is sacrificed, then both are. Today, some of the children of Isaac and Ishmael find themselves at odds or at war, as the Middle East shows us. Two people constantly vying for the property and the stuff and the things. She writes, yet these two sons reunite at Abraham's death. Together they bury their father. You can read about that in Genesis 25. Ishmael's hand was to be against his brothers, but Ishmael here proves the prediction wrong. If Ishmael and Isaac can reconcile, perhaps their children can do the same. Ishmael and Isaac got it. They remembered that the ousia that they were really after wasn't the property and wasn't the land, but it was the goodness and the compassion and the love of their father. All week long, or over the weekend, I saw, many of you probably did too, these images of reunion and release the Palestinian hostages, the Israeli hostages and the Palestinian prisoners. And I've been struck once again by this reunion that occurs in the parable of the prodigal son. How powerful it is when across the details of life, when we sort through the unimportant stuff and remember the things that matter, the love and the compassion and the mercy, that we remember who we really are. That is when we recall our true family lore. That is when we remember what it is to belong. So as Amy Jill Levine writes about these two sons, Isaac and Ishmael, and when we think about what this parable might have to tell us about the world and how we are to be in it, I think of John Wesley, right, who started the evangelical movement that would become the Methodist Church that we're a part of, and that so many of the other people that I met back in 2016 are a part of. He used to say, "The world is my parish," meaning that anyone, anywhere, that was in need of love, mercy, grace, was to be embraced by Christians, cared for, and welcomed by them. That there was more than enough of those riches, that stuff, the ousia, to go around. And John Wesley and the early church, and the early Methodist church, they lived that out. They unequivocally shared what they had. They weren't accountants per se, but if they had something to give, they gave. In this parable of the prodigal, we are reminded of the potential joy of reunion, reconciliation, restoration, and we're invited to remember the qualities of the Father, the properties, not the material goods and the land and the money that he had, but the essence, the substance of the one who will risk it all for love. The one who will go out into the dark field when the party is going on and will plead with someone to come inside. The one who will see someone thought lost coming home and run across a field to embrace them. As Christians, we are made in the image of God, called to bear the essence, the ousia, of God's love to others. What would the world look like, friends, if we were intentional about watching that horizon, about running to embrace those who are returning to God? I ran across a poem a few weeks ago. It's written by Benjamin Myers, who's a Christian poet, a writer, teaches at the Oklahoma Baptist University, and it's called Field. In this poem that he writes, I imagine he picks up where this parable ends, with a man dreaming of one father after another, in one field after another. And the final image that he leaves us with, I'll read the whole poem, but it's the final stanza that I want you to carry with you today. Invites us, reminds us that we have that substance, that quality, that spark of the image of God in us. And we are called to share it. We are called to carry it with us. We are called to run out and embrace. And so although this poem is called is Field, and it ends with this image of fathers, think of all of those in your family, all of those in your church family, in your life, who have been that bearer of God's stuff, ousia, to you. And how then you might also be one just like that. So here's the poem. Heaven is a field I am driving an old truck across, and the only dream I have on the subject. The sky over that pasture is so blue, I know it will burst if it doesn't turn 20 different reds at evening. The truck is my granddad's 72 Ford, still smelling of oil field and aftershave. When it stalls, I get out and lift the hood, but look instead into the everlasting distance, dotted with cattle and streaked with blotches, where the henbit has bruised the pasture purple. I think of my father lifting me onto his lap to let me drive as we bumped over clumps of gopher dirt in the pasture. How I steered wildly through the grass, his boot barely on the gas. But it is my father-in-law who is standing next to me when I look, who has bloodied his knuckles starting the engine running again, who is gesturing with a patience he rarely had in life for me to get back into the truck and drive on. I wake to hear our children breathe their sleep, one room over, and to tell you, love of all my lifetime, as we lie beneath our ceiling in the middle of our bed, that heaven has a field full of fathers. I have been there. I'm one of them. Would you pray with me? Holy Father, we imagine ourselves in that field. We imagine what it is to be embraced by you, and to remind ourselves, because of that embrace, of your love, your goodness, your grace. Be with us as we let that truth sink into our bones. Remind us, God, that it is your essence, your substance, your love and your light that is the sustaining truth for us. Carry us into that ousia so that we may carry that with us as we go. Amen.